Hey there folks, Wrel here. Today we're taking a look at the Zealot Overdrive engine, or ZOE, for the Vonu Sovereign's max units. And I held back on this review for a long time because ZOE was undeniably overpowered for skilled players who knew how to take advantage of the mobility. And I kind of figured that it was going to get nerfed. I didn't think it'd be nerfed this hard, but hey, what can you do? You'll be hearing me refer to the old ZOE from time to time, but this review is not going to specifically be a comparison to how it was in the past. This is the ZOE that we have now, and this is the ZOE that we're going to be talking about. Also, I do want to advise in advance that you should probably keep your annotations on for this video. All of the testing was done live and then broken down best it could be, so if some hard numbers actually come out, then I'll update parts of the video to reflect the changes. The Zealot Overdrive engine is going to run you 150, 200, 400, 500, and 1000 certs to unlock. That's 2250 certs in total if you're looking to unlock the entire chain. ZOE does have some quirks associated with it, aside from the normal adjustments to statistics, so let's just get those out of the way before moving on to a detailed breakdown. ZOE is an ability that toggles on and lasts for 15 seconds. While active, it cannot be turned off. You just have to let the ability run its course. When ZOE is on, you're going to be glowing bright pink and purple, and it's pretty obnoxious. People will know exactly when it's active and when you'll be taking more damage. The worst part about the glow though is that it makes it very difficult to track enemies at night. I would really like to see the devs reel back this glowing effect or give ZOE some sort of night vision while it's active. Your faction specific abilities should be limited to using them in appropriate combat situations, but not limited based on the time of day. That just doesn't make sense. If you switch max loadouts from an infantry terminal while ZOE is active, ZOE will be deactivated, but your cooldown will not be reset. Even trying to be tricky, like if you want to change out your ability slots or whatever, that will do nothing to reset the cooldown of ZOE. And lastly, ZOE can't be used while in the rumble seat of a harasser. Now that that's out of the way, let's break things down. The cooldown on ZOE decreases per rank, coming out to 42, 39, 36, 33, and 30 seconds. On top of that, your cooldown starts as soon as the ability becomes active, not after the effect wears off. So at the first rank, you're looking at 27 seconds of downtime where you don't have access to ZOE, but at max rank that drops down to only 15 seconds worth of downtime. While active, it seems to increase the amount of damage you take by roughly 34, 32, 30, 28, and 28%. These numbers are based on testing that we did and just eyeballing the damage meters, cross-referencing it to what was implied during the patch notes. And you'll also notice that at max rank, the mitigation is the same as it is at rank 4. Whether this is intended or not, I have no clue, and I really hope it isn't, and hopefully there wasn't an error in the testing. To put this into perspective though, all max units have 2000 health. They also have an 80% base damage resistance to small arms fire, meaning that your point blank 200 damage Gauss Saw only deals 40 damage per round against a max unit. With ZOE active, the 40 damage per bullet would get bumped up to 53.6, 52.8, 52, 51.2, and 51.2. And the difference, it can look small, a few damage points here and there, but it definitely adds up. If you're looking at the total rounds you'd need to kill a max unit point blank with a Gauss Saw, both with and without ZOE at first and max rank, you're looking at 50 shots without ZOE active, and 38 shots while ZOE is active at rank 1, and 39 or 40 shots with ZOE active at rank 5, depending on when they stop rounding. Do remember though that this is a point blank 200 damage Gauss Saw, instead of the more common damage ranges of 143 or 167. That said, a difference of 10 shots is still pretty massive when it comes to putting down a max, so you have to be sure to execute your targets quickly and in limited numbers. I want to go over two more quick examples of the impacts of ZOE before we get into the positive side of things. Now, let's say that you have max rank ZOE and max rank Kinetic Armor. Kinetic Armor bumps your standard 80% small arms resistance up to 85% at max rank. So this is definitely a very, very powerful cert to not only equip, but also to upgrade. Lastly, we're going to take a look at ZOE versus Flak Armor. Now specifically in the case of C4, max units take 65% more damage from C4 than the description would lead you to believe. So instead of doing 1,250 damage, which I believe is the right value, the damage value actually isn't showing up on the live servers right now at the time of making this video, but instead of doing 1,250 damage, it actually does 2,062.5 damage within 2 meters. And what this means is that without Flak Armor, by default, a max unit is killed by C4 in a single shot. With rank 1 Flak Armor, you'll survive a brick of C4 with 1,856.25 health. But using ZOE will still kill you. In fact, you're going to need at least rank 3 Flak Armor in order to survive a direct blast of C4 while ZOE is active.
It's quite a bit.
Alright, that was a lot of numbers, so we're actually going to take a break from the math for a while and talk about the mobility. While ZOE is active, it'll increase your forward movement speed by 50%, and movement speed in other directions by 43%. It does not increase your sprinting speed, but you will reach full sprint more quickly than you normally would. Now here's a comparison of how fast you reach a full sprint both with and without ZOE active. The numbers aren't exact, as you have to eyeball these things, but it is pretty close. This, and the ability to strafe more quickly, is probably the most useful feature of the new ZOE, as it lets you pick up and move after firing, or jumping, or falling, or crouching, or meleeing. That also makes it much easier to avoid C4, grenades, and other counters like this heavy assault's rocket. Overall, the speed increase is a shadow of its former self, but it does still feel like a substantial benefit. And also, engineers seem to have an easier time keeping up with you. You can still peek corners, which is a huge benefit. You just won't literally be running circles around people as you mow them down. Alongside the movement speed bonus is also a damage increase. Now coming from the patch notes, the damage increase is supposed to take place at close range and provide no benefits to explosive damage. However, the patch notes seem to be a little bit misleading. For anti-infantry weapons, the increase in damage seems to end at around 35 meters, maybe a little bit before that. This was an extremely difficult thing to test though, because even while using a blue shift, which is the most accurate VS anti-infantry weapon, the cone of fire made it really difficult to land shots consistently at this range. So provided I wasn't getting enough leg shots to throw the numbers askew, this does seem to be where the damage bonus ends. Even so, what you should be taking away from that is that at any range where a VS weapon is actually going to be effective, you are going to be getting a damage increase. As far as anti-vehicle weapons go, there doesn't actually seem to be a maximum range on the damage increase itself. And there is in fact a damage increase, albeit very slight. Also, this damage increase only affects direct hits. So if you're using bursters, it's not going to get an increase in that flak damage, but it will get a bonus when attacking targets that do not trigger the flak. And I do want to preface this by saying that these numbers are not pulled from the game files directly. They've just been totaled based on live testing and looking at health bars and comparing, etc, etc. So these numbers could very well be a little bit off. That said, what I've come up with are, on anti-infantry weapons, you have a damage boost that hovers somewhere around 12% at all ranks, up to 35 meters. On the bursters direct hits, so not the explosions, you seem to be getting about a 10% increase or so. And on anti-vehicle weapons like the Comet and the Vortex, it's something painfully small, maybe 6%, but at all ranges. What this means is that your 143 damage blue shift becomes a 160.6 damage blue shift. Now 160.6 damage is not enough to reduce your 7-shot kill range start to finish. And people usually have something to say about this, as if we're fighting in 1v1s all day long, but when you think logically, there are definite benefits to having more damage, even though it may not lower your time to kill in a stand-up fight. The first is that when hitting the leg of a target, you only deal 90% of your weapon damage. A 143 damage weapon is balanced specifically around 7 shots to the chest, as 143 damage times 7 is 1001. If ZOE is active, however, your leg shot won't even matter. Even 7 leg shots won't matter, you're still going to get that 7-shot kill. Next, you're actually extending the kill potential of the weapons that normally drop off in damage after 10 meters, until about 32 meters. So your Nebula is normally a 7-shot kill within 10 meters thanks to the 143 damage, but it drops off to 112 at 50 meters. So each meter past the max damage range is going to drop your bullet damage by 0.775. But thanks to ZOE, if you're doing 160 damage per shot, minus 143, since that's basically the cutoff for a 7-shot kill, you come up with 17 extra damage while ZOE is active. And then you take 17 divided by 0.775, and that means that you extended your 7-shot kill range by 21.9354 meters, and we're just going to call that 22. So you extended your 7-shot kill range by 22 meters on top of the 10 meters that you had to begin with. So for blue shifts, you may technically not be getting as much of a benefit from ZOE because the damage doesn't degrade over range, but for every other weapon, the numbers are pretty cut and dry. Lastly, you always have factors like a wounded target, nano armor, shielded targets. More damage is good damage, no matter how you look at it. That said though, I don't really approve of the current damage numbers as a legitimate trait of this ability. They're more like icing on a cake of mediocrity. The numbers might seem significant, and I know I talked them up a lot, but in actual play they're pretty lackluster. And the reason that they are lackluster is because we don't have the rate of fire, and more importantly, the accuracy to make a damage boost effective. This is the reason why dual blue shifts are so popular, and arguably the only really competitive weapon in the VS arsenal. TR weaponry is far and away more effective, even though the damage being dealt per bullet is technically lower. And the reason for that is, you could have a weapon that does 1,000,000 damage in a single shot, but it would mean absolutely nothing unless you landed that shot. This is the main problem with putting a damage boost on VS weapons. Higher rate of fire, lower bloom, and lower damage per bullet is going to scale better than higher damage per bullet, higher bloom, and lower rate of fire. Ironically enough, this is the exact same problem that the NC's infantry face as well. But the difference between NC infantry and a VS max is that infantry can aim down sights to increase their accuracy, and max units cannot. Because of this, I would much rather see an accuracy increase while ZOE is active instead of a damage boost. It would increase the skill cap, and it would also harken back to one of our faction traits, which is in fact accurate weapons. So outside of statistics, how can we make the best use of this ability? Post-patch, it has become much more difficult to use correctly because the situations where the ability won't end up getting us killed are much fewer now that the ability has been severely weakened. ZOE does not make someone immortal. It never has, but prior, we had the mobility to get us out of bad situations. Now, if you walk into one, if you turn a corner against a few heavies or if you eat a rocket and some gunfire, you die very, very quickly. That said, the first thing that we want to know when using ZOE is how many opponents that we're going to be dealing with at a single time. So basically, we're going to be pacing our encounters. And you could be thinking, well, if I know that I'm going to be fighting a handful of guys, why would I even use ZOE in the first place? And the answer to that, aside from the additional stopping power, is mobility. You should be using ZOE to peek corners. You should be using ZOE to dodge rockets. You should be using ZOE to chase down enemies that aren't also baiting you into C4. You should be using ZOE to dart from cover to cover more quickly than enemies will anticipate you will. The extra mobility you get from using ZOE is golden, and it allows a skilled player to move more like a standard infantry than the clunky weapons platform that the Max was designed to be. That's not to say that you should be turning it on for the sake of turning it on though. I oftentimes turn ZOE on before entering a room, and then fingers crossed that I'll just run in there guns a-blazing and mow people down. And while that works from time to time, a smarter way to use this ability is to use it reactively. It's probably a good habit to get into, to just play like you don't have an ability equipped at all, and then turn it on when you need to avoid a bad situation. The hardest part about using ZOE is knowing when. To build on that, you should use it to avoid counters. So if you see a light assault with determination in his eye, that's someone who wants to see for you. If you see a heavy assault run behind cover before you can finish him off, he's usually going to switch to his rocket launcher and then pop back out and try to take you down. In either case, your answer should be to ZOE and run away. But do remember though that you're going to be stuck sitting in a very vulnerable state for 15 seconds. So if you charge in and you eat a bunch of damage, it's going to make it much easier for enemies to come by, chase you down, and pick you off. Because of this, you always want to travel with engineers, and you should really treat engineers like sort of a home base. So you charge in, you deal the damage, and then you get out before enemies can counterattack. We did mention this earlier, but it is probably not a good idea to use this ability at night. You won't be able to see much of anything during the darkest hours unless you're maybe playing on low graphical settings. And lastly, as far as tips go, is that you want to run a loadout tailored to your situation. That said, as far as attachment and weapon options go, it's much more important to upgrade ZOE now than it previously was, thanks to the cooldown reduction and lower increase in damage taken. So if you really want to use ZOE in any effective light, you want to keep it at least rank 4. For weapon options, there are a handful of setups that I'm running at the moment, and I'm also not opposed to mixing and matching weapon setups either. For example, if you're stacking anti-infantry weapons, dropping a Cosmos on top of a Quasar is going to let you stagger the magazine sizes, meaning that you can always have something firing while the other is reloading, instead of force reloading both weapons. Whether this is worth it or not to some people is another matter entirely. As much as I would like to think that the dual nebulas would work well with ZOE, I don't think they do. And believe me, I tried really hard. Nebula as a weapon, regardless of the higher rate of fire, does not have enough accuracy to make it a viable option. What you're looking for with ZOE is the fastest functional one-on-one time to kill that you can manage, and this usually means being able to achieve headshots. Because of that, dual blue shifts are still a great option, and it's really hard to go wrong with them. AV weapons get a negligible boost in damage, so when it comes to AV weapon selection, it should be specific to your situation instead of being synergetic with the ability itself, because ZOE is going to grant you mobility no matter what, so avoiding incoming fire while dealing damage is always going to help you. Comets are still the most solid AV option despite the nerfs that they received. They are still monstrously powerful against infantry, max units, and enemy vehicles, albeit slightly less accurate now than they were previously. These are your go-to for most situations. Vortexes are meant specifically for combat at extreme ranges, so think northern Indar regions. They are outstanding for picking off fleeing vehicles with pinpoint accuracy and are useful against enemy max units provided you can aim. ZOE as an ability, however, does not synergize with these weapons, because as you charge them you're forced to walk, thus restricting mobility, while also leaving you open to additional damage. This is much different than Comets, where you can drop a burst of damage and instantly get up to sprinting speed again, which will allow you to avoid incoming enemy fire while your projectiles are in flight. Still, vortexes have their place, and additional mobility is always a good thing. When it comes to suit slots, any are good, and they cater specifically to both playstyle and nearby threats. If there's enemy vehicles or a risk of C4, say charging a well-prepared enemy defense, then you go with Flak. If you have pocket engineers but are dealing primarily with enemy infantry and max units, say in your biolabs or whatever, then you go with Kinetic Armor to effectively remove that downside that ZOE gives you. And if you're lone wolfing around a tower or in a small scale situation, then Nanite Auto Repair is going to keep you going when there are no engineers in sight. But you're at a greater risk of damage, of course. So if you put everything together, the damage bonus, the damage taken, the movement speed, the obnoxious glow, is the new Zealot Overdrive engine worth using, especially over the much safer and less expensive charge ability? The short answer is, I don't really know. It depends a lot on how well you can use your movement and how often you're working in a group. The skill floor on this ability has been raised a great deal, and unfortunately the skill ceiling has been lowered about as much. The current ZOE will get you killed more often than it will do you any good, and to top it off, the ability's teamplay potential is practically non-existent. Max units are meant to be hard-hitting bullet sponges, extremely scary but slow creatures, and ZOE does a good deal to remove that perception. Because even though it moves a little bit more quickly, people know that they just need to shoot at it and it's eventually going to die without much you can say about it. If you don't kill it in your life, either your buddy or his buddy is going to. That's not the way that it should be. A max unit should not be scared of actually engaging in combat with the enemy. I'm a player who generally solos, and because of it, I can use this ability decently well. I run it with Nanite Auto Repair, so I'm never tethered to a single location or to an engineer, and I can run and I can gun and I can slap my way to victory until I'm eventually overwhelmed. But at the same time, the ability is so counterintuitive to teamplay that I'm not surprised to hear that certain outfit or squad leaders are completely disallowing its use in organized operations. As a max unit in teamplay, you're doing one of three things. You're being a meat shield as you charge into a strategic location, hopefully with allies following you. you're maintaining an area of denial or security, say around a capture point or a generator, and you're laying down additional damage that would not have been otherwise achievable by a normal infantry unit. If you're leading a charge with ZOE, you're basically a flimsy version of something that you could have been, and the damage output isn't substantial enough to justify the amount of potential damage taken if you're on the front lines. If you're maintaining an area of denial, not only are you trying to tank enemies and fend them off, but you are locked into a certain area either due to the locations you're defending or due to staying near the engineers needed to keep you alive. In either case, ZOE is less viable due to the constrained mobility and the increased burden on support. Laying down additional damage, which is arguable at best, and cleaning up stragglers is the only core goal, as I see it, that ZOE will specifically help you with in team play. When you're on the offensive, some extra mobility and stopping power can be very helpful, but you do so at cost, which is fine, and I think that the trade-off should be there. I think that ZOE has a place as a solo-oriented ability, but I also think that a couple considerations could easily make it more oriented toward team play without overbalancing it. The first is that you should be able to turn ZOE off, and this is the biggest feature that should be implemented regardless of whether you're designing it for an individual or designing it for a squad role. If you're charging a point, you can use the increased mobility to get in, and you surprise the enemy for an initial blitz, and then you could turn it off when the reprisal starts coming in. This way engineers aren't overburdened for the duration of the fight. If you're defending an area, you can unlock ZOE when you sense an opening, a weak point, and then turn it off again when things start to look bleak. Again, less burden on your engineers, and it keeps you in the fight instead of making you a liability or forcing you to hide in a corner until the ability wears off. That simple change remedies two of the biggest challenges with ZOE in team play. Lastly, and most importantly, is that it increases the skill cap. In PlanetSide 2, situations can change very quickly, at any moment, and having to sit through 15 seconds of an ability due to circumstances changing for the worst is not fun by any stretch of the imagination. It's the same problem people have with flares. You go into combat thinking one thing, then you use flares to escape because someone pulled a lock-on launcher, and not only that, you're sitting outside of combat until your cooldowns come back. Without the ability to turn it off, that's ZOE in a nutshell. Something that I would like to see happen with ZOE, though not really necessary, just something that would drastically reward skill while emphasizing its offensive nature, is to increase the duration of ZOE by a second for each enemy you kill while ZOE is active. This way, if a player gets the drop on a bunch of enemies and then mows them all down, that's what ZOE does. Boom, you just pop 3 or 4 seconds onto your ZOE duration, and you're thinking to yourself, man, I really want to use up the rest of this duration. So you look for more people to kill so that you can keep it active. You're mentally encouraging the player to use the ability in a zealous manner. Because if you turn it off, well, you just lost the progress that you made, and you have to wait for the cooldown to come back. And you could be thinking to yourself, Wrel, won't a player be able to have the ability on at all times then? And the answer is yeah, potentially. If you can mow down at least 15 people within the duration that you're given, yeah, I think that you deserve to be able to turn the thing back on again instantly. And this is meta. You're encouraging the player to use the ability in the way that the devs designed it to be, zealously, committed to your downsides, without actually pigeonholing them into that role. You aren't punishing them for using the ability, the player has the option of punishing themselves, should they opt to keep ZOE active in a bad situation because of the feeling that it gives you. It's just like pulling the wheel of a slot machine. You know that you're going to lose money, but you might just maybe be able to win it all back. So, overall, I think that ZOE has a place, and I actually think that it's in a decent place right now, albeit somewhat underpowered. I know I gave what may have felt like some harsh criticism, kind of a bleak outlook, but it's just those 2 or 3 small tweaks that are needed to make the ability viable again, not just as a single ability for a single player, but viable in a squad again as well. Let me turn it off, let me see what I'm shooting at night, and give me an accuracy buff instead of a damage buff. And potentially, if you wanted to be awesome and truly make things interesting, then that very last suggestion could be an extremely flavorful mechanic. But if this video has been interesting, helpful, or entertaining, please feel free to like, subscribe, tell your friends about the channel, and if you have any tips you'd like to share about using ZOE, except for don't use ZOE, use charge, then I would like to hear about them in the comment section down below. How has ZOE been performing for you since the update? Did you cert into it again, or did you invest somewhere else? Thanks very much, folks. Wrel signing off.
How
I
do
think
you...
you just have to have a lot of
That is no
activity.
fun.
Here we go.
Oh no.
Oh no.
I just see a reverse poke through.
Did we get the picture at least? Did we get the picture?
That's good.
Oh, we did?
Wait, okay, we got the
Oh, we
picture,
did?
right?
What? I forgot to smile.
Don't like this.
Get on my reaver.